Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm really excited today on Number One Leading Ladies, and we're also recording for our book coming up, Women in Multifamily Real Estate. I want to have experts in multifamily and experts in cash flowing assets, help you guys get more information about exactly how this whole thing works, right? So we know that insurance is a large part of any kind of risky investment. You want to make sure to insure your assets. So today I've invited Kimberly Stallings, or Kim Stallings, with us, and I'll let her introduce herself because she'll do it justice, and we'll get a little bit of tips and tricks today on what helps to keep your assets safe.
I love it. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be part of this women investor community because I think it's really important. I myself am an investor. I invest in single family, fix and flips, multifamily, commercial office leases, doing a raw land deal right now with my family. So about to build an RV park. So I love real estate. It's my side gig, but my daytime honey is this fancy, sexy world of insurance. So I own a boutique insurance brokerage. We write everything under the sun all over the country and internationally. We do full-scale business, personal. We do it all. I like apartments because I invest in apartments. I like real estate because I invest in real estate, but there's nothing we don't write. Got a master's, couple of degrees, couple little kids, single mom life, busy girl, crushing it.
You are
That's me.
amazing.
That's
Seriously.
me.
I find that there's so much, anyway, I just find that, women, obviously, I think we're like super women,
Yeah.
like doing what you just said. Holy Hannah.
Yeah.
So obviously whoever's listening and watching this right now is not alone. You know what I mean? I know it takes some different things. And so maybe during this interview, we'll get a little bit personal too, but mostly these interviews are mostly to kind of hit on the pros and cons of getting involved with, say, for example, insuring your assets. More terminology and more tricks and ideas to be able to make things work. That's really what I think everything is when you're doing deals, is being flexible. So, in your emails to us, you've been explaining to us different options that we have. What would you say when you're insuring a cash flowing property? What would be the top couple of things that you think are really important? And I'm sure it varies per type of asset. What would be your biggest concerns that need to be handled, and how would you handle those?
I think that a lot of people get sticker shock when it comes to insurance because it's a fixed expense. And so, in any cash flowing property, you're always looking to decrease as many of your fixed expenses, of course, as you can, because that's a variable that you feel like you can control. And I'm not just saying insurance shouldn't be one of them because I sell insurance, but you might not have ever had a claim. But I see claims, as I'm knocking on wood, like every day. So when your insurance isn't covering your asset properly and you've got it all on the line, then you're left holding the bag. And so coverage. Coverage is so important. This is not state minimum auto insurance that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with property insurance, which has 3 or 4 different coverage forms. It's filled with the landmines and the pitfalls of endorsements, which nobody even looks at. Half the insurance agents out there give you like a stripped down quote. They don't explain to you what's included, what's excluded. They don't go over how the deductibles and how coinsurance actually works in a claim situation. And really, other than making your lender happy, you only care about insurance when you have a claim. And so your strategy as an investor can be all kinds of different things, as long as it nets you out and saves your ass when you have a claim. I mean, that's the important part. Otherwise, why are you paying for insurance? Just to be lender compliant. I'm not saying everybody has claims, but when you do have one, they get up there. They can get up there and they can make or break your deal. I had a client just lost his property because of a claim. He had to go into bankruptcy like this week. That's real life on a big commercial office plex. So that's, we don't ever want to see that. We want to make sure that you're buying what you're being cautioned to buy to avoid losing it all. So coverage. Yeah.
You're right. And so that's something that when people invest in single tenant assets, when people invest in multifamily assets, there's different types of cash flowing assets, right?
Yep.
They're all different, but I will vouch for, at least in multifamily, where I have the most experience when it comes to, I have a single family where I've got a renter, but I kind of have him paying for the insurance. So
yeah.
basically on these buildings, we're all like, people are freaking living in them. People are moving in, they're moving out. They have girlfriends, they have boyfriends, they have, they're
Yep.
cooking, they have kids that slip and fall. I mean, it's just all the things. There's pools. So, we've had 2 fire claims this year on 2 properties. I just had a roof claim on a property last week. So, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, claims all the time. And it's just like, we actually haven't been dealing with that roof claim for a while because we've been like patching the roof and like doing other things with it. But now it's getting to the point where we've had to tarp the roof. And so we're like, okay, we need to make a claim. We
Yeah.
just didn't think that the hailstorm we had recently was big enough, but the adjuster
Yeah.
thinks differently. So we'll see. But yeah, so the insurance is important. Now, you mentioned a whole bunch of terminology that I caught on to that, I'll be honest, I don't even understand. And that's why we have an expert like you that usually when I see these things, I'd be calling you going, how do we deal with this? And that's why you're explaining, we need to split it this way. We need to do it on this value and this. Anyway, so there's a couple
Yeah.
of terms that you mentioned. For example, coinsurance. What does that mean?
Yeah. So coinsurance is in all of our policies that have properties, whether it's your personal home that you own, a landlord property, a big commercial office space, an apartment, it doesn't matter. Coinsurance is basically, it's like the worst kind of deductible. It's a penalty. It states, and every policy has one, it's either 80%, 90%, 100%, or what they call nil, which is non-existent, which is great if you can get a nil policy, but a lot of carriers aren't offering that anymore. And it's a game. We call it the coinsurance game. And so you have to make sure when you figure out how much you're insuring your property for, because let's face it, you might be buying it for more than what it costs to build it, or for less than what it costs to build it. Either way, they both have good strategies, but the insurance carriers don't care what the tax appraised value is, what the market value is, what you paid for it, what the loan amount is. They don't care about that. They care about, they have to rebuild it if it burns to the ground or blows away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's the current cost of construction for labor and material per foot? If you aren't insured to at least that coinsurance coefficient of whatever at the time of the claim, which this is like a moving number, with inflation and
Oh my
with
God, we
regardless
just
of your,
had lumber
yeah,
go way up. Oh my Lord.
yeah, regardless of your political beliefs, things that happen in the greater macroeconomic planet that have to do with free trade agreements, that have to do with labor interchanges, that have to do with skilled and unskilled labor and how much that costs in different areas. We mess with Mexico, we don't get cheap bricks. Half of our apartment complexes have bricks on the outside. You
Yeah.
mess with Africa, you don't get copper
Yeah.
to like put the wiring in your building. So we mess around with stuff like that. And unbeknownst to you, something's happening in some other random part of the world. And all of a sudden it costs twice as much to build the thing. And that's when you have a claim. So the adjuster looks at the cost to rebuild at the date of the claim. And if you are not insured, which is a number that we can't predict, okay? So if you're not insured at least to that coinsurance coefficient, which could be 80%, 90%, 100%, which is horrible, 100%, then you get penalized for the amount you are underinsured times the loss amount. So if it's a big loss that's not a total loss, that's a big penalty. So in the claim, they take your deductible out and then they take out your penalty. And that can, depending on how you're insured, eat up your entire claim and then there's no claim to pay. And that's happened. I've seen it happen. So, that coinsurance is important, noticing that it is in your policy and then noticing, if you want to underinsure your property a little bit, because you can, cool, but don't underinsure it so much. Because, of course you save money, because you save money underinsuring your property because it's just math. It's the thousands of dollars that your building is worth divided by 100 times the cent rate. So, you can't change the cent rate and you can't change the divided by 100. All you can change is that first number. So by all means, reduce that number as much as you can, but be over, like comfortably over your coinsurance. Doesn't matter if it burns to the ground, they write you the check, nobody gives a damn. Yeah. But if it doesn't burn to the ground, if it's on fire, go ahead and throw some gas on it. You didn't hear me say that. But if it doesn't burn to the ground, then you're in a problem. So that's make sure it's gone. If you think you're underinsured, make sure it's gone. Yeah. So that's the thing. That's what coinsurance is. It's nobody really pays attention to it, and then they get really upside down in the values, and then they have a large partial loss, and then there ends up not being any money in the claim, because by the time they take out your deductible and the coinsurance penalty, there's no check.
Yeah. Luckily, we had good insurance, or we did that on our property in Phoenix, where like a third of the building burned down. Like, and it
Yeah,
wasn't all the way burned down either. It was just basically like almost 100 units on one side,
yeah,
you know. So luckily,
yeah,
that insurance was good, and it
yeah.
covered lost rents. It covered a lawsuit that happened.
Yep.
It covered all the stuff, that
Yeah,
happened. Yeah. So, because that can be scary, but as long as no one's hurt, it actually ends up being okay, because we're able to,
yeah.
you said, rebuild those units, and then everyone's
Hmm.
covered in the meantime. So just
Hmm.
cover it, I guess, with up to the level of coinsurance. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always tell my clients, like, let's be, let's try to be 5 to 7% over coinsurance.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example right now. We've got in fluctuations in the market right now with how much it costs to have somebody build something, labor shortages, people not working, and how much the cost of materials are. We just can't even get stuff shipped in from other countries. The warehouses are empty. We're in the middle of wildfires, in the middle of hurricanes, and all that stuff's going to have to be rebuilt. And then randomly in the middle of all the hurricane damage and all the wildfire damage, your place needs to get rebuilt. So of course, supply and demand, that just drives up the price of people working and what that stuff costs. So I like my clients to be, 5 to 7% over a comfortable coinsurance amount.
Okay. So
At a
good
minimum.
advice for everyone listening. Try to make
Yeah.
sure that you cover your assets. So then you also had a couple of different terms too that I didn't understand. So endorsement, what does that mean?
Mhm. Mhm. So endorsements, so there's standard policy language with London, where most policies are originated from, or one of the 75 syndicates plays in some of the policy at some point. You don't know that, but that's how your policies are made up. So there's standard policy language. And then every carrier, the thing that makes one carrier more competitive over another, just like with your auto insurance, when we're talking about like Geico and Progressive and stuff like that, there are things inherently that they add and take away from the standard policy language. Those are all called endorsements. And so the stuff that they add increases your coverage and could be really nice for you. But the sneaky stuff that they take away, you don't realize unless you get the full endorsement list, which is like a huge, like bulleted list in the middle of a raw quote. And most people don't get raw quotes, or if they do, they don't even look at them. They just scan for the price, because they don't realize that there's a whole lot of endorsements that could make one policy worth the extra $1,000 or $2,000 in a commercial deal, over the other policy, or in like a personal lines deal, an extra $100 or $200. The coverages that are in those endorsements that are added or taken away is the meat of what you're buying. So they're super important. And a lot of times they got like really cute, clever names, and you can't tell from just reading them, if you don't know better, exactly what they're covering or not covering. But if your broker, whoever you're working with, is kind of staying up on their due diligence, then you can kind of find that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with endorsements, is there any advice that you would have, what to do or what not to do?
I would definitely ask your agent or whoever you're working with to say, hey, what kind of endorsements do we have on here? And if they're like, what do you mean endorsements? Well, you're obviously with the wrong agent at that point in time, because they should know what an endorsement is.
Yeah.
Um, and if they're not prepared to tell you the endorsements that are added and taken away, there might be a really good reason for that. But that's the stuff, those are the causes of loss in the claims. So, I mean, the stuff that's added and taken away is in there. Like,
Right.
a special perils policy, which is what you should always buy. It's the best. Could have theft or could not have theft. Could have assault and battery, could not have assault and
We had
battery.
one without assault and battery. Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, could have firearms, could not have firearms. And
That's why
even
you
with assault,
call a commercial agent and not a
yeah,
civil.
yeah. Even because nobody wants to, all these properties are rated on zip codes, which are all rated on crime ratings. And so, yeah, maybe the price looks great and you're like, oh, wow, the deductibles are low and the price is great. And it has what is called a full A and B exclusion, which is assault, battery, abuse, molestation, and firearms. So maybe it doesn't cover any of that. And there's a shooting at your property. And I mean, you're going to get sued, but you don't have any coverage to even defend you out of the lawsuit if that's not even inherently considered part of your policy, or if it has been sublimited, because sometimes they include it, but then they put a sublimit on it, like 25 grand. Well, you know, grandpa gets shot, family might want more than 25 grand.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh my God.
so marijuana, I mean, and this is a hot button issue. Marijuana and cannabis we're starting to see get excluded on a lot of these policies. And you might think like, well, it doesn't matter. Well, people grow weed in apartment complexes. I mean, let's just call an ace and a spade a spade. People are growing weed in there, and that's fine. You know, in a lot of places it's legal. I think that's great. But the oils from the marijuana plant itself are very intrusive, and they get in the air ducting systems and they get in the walls and they can't be remediated. Like you can't paint over it. It ruins the drywall. It ruins the ceilings. It ruins the air ducting. So, you know, somebody of course wants to make a claim on that because that's a super expensive renovation. But if it's excluded from your policy, then you can't make a claim on that. So then what do you do?
What do you do about like smoke and curry? Same thing, kind of.
Oh, they're not excluded. They're not excluded. Ebola is, bed
Oh
bugs
my
are.
God.
Yeah. No, it's for real. But we had Ebola here in Dallas. I don't know where everybody else is listening from, but we had Ebola in an apartment complex in Dallas, like, you know, like 7 years ago.
Wow, that's
And
crazy.
that's like a hazmat, HVAC, massive undertaking to clean and remediate that property. Excluded with all the other communicable diseases like the Rona that everybody's dealing with. So, I mean, you know, that's a thing.
Yeah.
That's the
And
thing. So those endorsements are important.
I'm starting to see, I don't know if you can explain this from the quote that you've sent me, where we have several different comparisons side by side. I've seen an addition of like virus, bacteria,
Yeah,
bacteria, things like that. And is that considered like a extra rider or an exclusion or what? I didn't read it. Like, what does that say on there? It
yeah,
sounds like it's new.
yeah. Virus and bacteria have been excluded since the plague because, you know, well, I mean, the history of insurance is really interesting. You know, jobs in the world are like prostitution, then banking, then insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had to finance prostitutes, so they developed banking, and then they had to secure their investment, so they developed insurance. It's like 100%. That's how all three of those things came around back in the first crusade. Okay, so of course, ships that were filled with plague rats, you know, they sent them out there in the water and they burned them. Well, the cargo holds and everything that were in there, all the goods, services, animals, people, whatever, they got burned up too. And so everybody wants to insure that, but that's like an act of God. So it's not considered something that's insurable because you can't control viruses, bacteria, and communicable diseases. And so that's been an exclusion for almost ever. We might, however, in the future, in light of the Rona, we've seen some riders, some endorsements, some separate policies being issued in light of all this because of business interruption. We've seen policies starting to come out where somebody's going to offer at a rate, I mean, at a high rate, coverage for things like coronavirus, other communicable diseases, so, you know, SARS, swine flu, Spanish flu, you know, these things that we've had in the past. And so we might see that that endorsement will get split, and there still might be some viruses and bacteria that are included as excluded on policies, and maybe some that you can buy on via endorsement.
Yeah.
And so that'll be interesting in the next 2 years to see how London kind of responds to that. You know, how the Titanic of insurance kind of decides it wants to work.
How crazy. I didn't realize that London decided that, just like they do with like LIBOR and, you know,
Yeah.
a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
learning a lot today. Now, what's the difference between an endorsement and a rider? I've heard of like having a rider.
And a writer is an endorsement.
Oh, okay.
Anything technically, I mean, definitionally, anything you add or subtract is an endorsement.
Okay.
An exclusion is an endorsement. So, but some people would say, oh, this is an exclusion. It is, but it's just a type of endorsement.
Okay. Exclusion. Okay. Now, can you, obviously, so for cars, for example, if I was going to have a less of a deductible or more of a deductible, my understanding with the higher the deductible, the more that you have to pay out of pocket, obviously. Yeah, we are recording. Explain to me what you can do to change. So we had, for example, a really high deductible on a policy, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to decrease it because we're like, well, what if we have something that happens? Look at what we actually have in our cash balances in those reserve accounts. Like, could we even cover it if we had something? And so we decided to reduce that amount. We had to pay more, but what would you recommend when it comes to deductibles?
So, I mean, deductibles are a seesaw with price. So the higher the deductible, the lower the price because you're taking more risk, you're transferring less risk. Lower deductibles, the higher the price. Um, in in the markets, whether it's personal lines or commercial lines, some carriers only offer certain deductibles, so you're kind of pigeonholed. So that's one thing. So you might not always be able to change a deductible on a quote. It might not be an option for you. I usually tell my clients, I've got a really nice client. She only buys brand new construction stuff, brand new townhomes, brand new multifamily, brand new apartments. And the strategy on something that's brand new is a little less expensive when it comes to insurance because everything in it's new. So there's no wear and tear. But I usually tell her, like, hey, if you're feeling froggy, let's save you some money and go with like a really high deductible, because what's the likelihood that you're going to make a claim? And how much of it's under warranty? Because it's brand new. And so our strategy with her is, hell, make that deductible like sky high, because we're under a ceiling to floor builder's warranty for like 3 years. So, hey, for 3 years, let's save the insurance money with a really, really high deductible. And then we kind of get into it and say, hey, it's been a few years. And even though that's a 20-year roof, it's Texas. We know it's not a 20-year roof. It's not going to happen. We've gotten through 3 hard years. Maybe let's think about backing that deductible down a little bit and paying up some of the money that we've saved from the last few years. And so, if you just put a brand new roof on and you don't get that many storms in that area, maybe you want to raise that deductible up and roll the dice. But it's always a dice roll. It's always a dice roll. But it is true, higher deductible, lower premium, if you can get that done.
Yeah, so that was a property that was C-class, pretty good as far as the roof being newer and things like that, but it was in West Texas, so it was an area that there's a lot of hail, there's a lot of windstorms, things like that, so we had to kind of be cautious there. And it, like I mentioned, was a C-class. It's not a new build by any means, so we just kind of assume there's more risk there. Okay, well, that explains a couple of different terms. Now, is there a difference when it comes to the size of the property or what type of property when you're looking at cash flowing commercial assets that would be less for insurance in general because there's less risk? Like, for example, like single tenant where it's an office building and there's a big professional organization that they could probably pay part of their fees. I don't even know, but they're only in there during the week and then they're gone during the weekend. They're not living or cooking in there. Are there different assets that are higher for insurance than others?
So in the world of property insurance, what the carriers look at is called COPE, C-O-P-E. And the C stands for construction, because a building built out of wood frame sticks with wood siding catches on fire and burns to the ground faster than a building with brick siding, than a building with hardy board siding, than a building that's not even made out of frame. It's made out of masonry cinder blocks, like some office buildings are. And so they look at that way it's constructed: flat roof, pitched roof, how many stories, 2 stories, 5 stories. I mean, all of that, basement, all of that goes into the construction. Then they look at occupancy. Is it habitational occupancy or is it office occupancy? And then how much of it is occupied? Is it 90% occupied? Is it 40% occupied? And who is it occupied by? Any Section 8, any subsidized, any elderly, any student housing. They look at all of that. So that's the occupancy. Vacant buildings are far more expensive than occupied buildings, et cetera, et cetera. A single tenant versus multi-tenant. Of course, single tenant's less risky than multi-tenant. Occupied's less risky than vacant. Occupied with students and elderly and assisted living in Section 8 is more dangerous than occupied by not, statistically. So they look at that. The P stands for protection. And what they mean by that is smoke detectors, fire alarms, burglar alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, built with any green materials. Is it fenced? Is it not fenced? Is it lit? Is it next to a power treatment plant? Or is it next to a school zone? Is it next to single family housing? Or is it in a concrete jungle of nothing but industrial and other apartments? So they look at the crime score rating and the zip code, and they look at that 4-digit subset zip code. Everybody's like, what's these extra 4 digits on my zip code? It's for insurance.
Oh.
It's for insurance. So those extra 4 digits break down where in a zip code a property is. And that's what they look at for the crime score ratings.
Oh.
And so that's really important. So that's the protection. What level is the fire department? Is it a volunteer fire department or a level 1? How quickly will they respond if there's a fire? Because that lets you know how much of the building might be able to be saved once it's caught on fire. So all of that goes into the P, protection. And then the E in COPE is exposure. And so there they want to know what the surrounding risks are. How attractive is this? Apartments are a bigger exposure than commercial office buildings because people are moving in and out of apartments all the time. A-class apartments are less exposed than C and D-class apartments, simply because of what you got to do to get in those properties and how much they cost and who's attracted to those neighborhoods versus the other. That's just numbers and statistics. It's not anybody making judgment calls, just numbers. So they want to see if you're near a lake, if you're in a coastal region, if you're in a wildfire zone. Are you in an area that gets constantly hit by wind and hail issues? Are you in Tornado Alley? So that's like the environmental exposure situation. So those are the 4 things that a carrier looks at when they're looking at a property risk. And that's what determines the cent rate. And so all of those things give you plus or minus pennies. And the plus or minus pennies, every carrier has a different importance for. So some carriers penalize you, penalize you less for certain risks than others. And that's why you see way different rates from multiple carriers, because the things that they put pennies in the cent rate on, again, get multiplied by every $100 of value that you're insuring. So it's back to that math formula. So, one carrier's cent rate might be more attractive than another carrier's cent rate.
Yeah.
Because one carrier cares more about the exposure than the other carrier, and they don't give you enough credits for, they minus pennies for newer roofs. They minus pennies for green construction, LEED certified construction. They minus pennies for year of construction and minus pennies for occupancy. But then they add pennies for you're in a coastal zone, and they add pennies for you have X amount of Section 8 or student housing. So, every carrier adds and subtracts different pennies for those things. Does that make sense?
That's cool. COPE. Yeah. I had no idea.
COPE, coping skills.
I'm like, y'all make this stuff up off the hip, but now I see that there's actually criteria. Now I've got a question on the O, the occupancy, because something that I was thinking in my head would work one way, the way you said it worked the other way. So I was kind of surprised. So for example, for the occupancy, I would figure that a less occupied building would be less expensive. So like, for example, if I had a 70% occupied multifamily building versus 100%, I would think it'd be more for the more occupied building, but you just said it was the opposite. So I don't understand that, but I don't have to understand it, but that's interesting.
Well, I'll explain it because real quick. When things are vacant, they're an attractive nuisance.
Squatters.
For
Yeah.
people to squat and for people to move in, for people to cook drugs, for people to do underhanded behavior, for people to, and that's a single family house that's vacant or a construction project or an apartment, it doesn't matter. When they're vacant, you attract an element, kids, kids that are looking to like find a place to kiss and make out and neck. I mean, you just attract an element um, of potential hazard.
Mhm.
More importantly than that, let's say there's a water line that breaks or freezes or something in one of those vacant units. Well, nobody's living there. And so, unless you're just randomly going in the unit every day, which none of our property managers do in large apartment complexes,
No.
well, they don't know if that water line is like seeping through the building or through the ceiling. So, your response rate for notifying somebody of a claim gets heavily reduced in vacant properties. So that's why an insurance, because insurance companies are, again, always looking at mitigating the potentiality of paying out a total loss amount. Because, your property might be worth 2 million and it might be insured for $2 million, but you're only paying like 17 grand in insurance. Well, I mean, if you pay for $17,000 worth of insurance for 2 years, you're only in it for 35 grand, and then it burns the ground. Well, they're writing you a $2 million check and you only gave them $35,000. So, I mean, they're like significantly in the hole.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they charge you pennies for things that could potentially lead to a hazard going undetected and causing a much bigger claim.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my understanding on an insurance is on the back end is that they're usually pretty smart and they'll take the monthly premiums that people are paying and reinvest those into things like multifamily
100%.
deals or into certain parts
Mhm.
of REITs and things like that, to where they're
Yep.
making way more than you're paying every month. So they're not out like that bad, I guess, when this stuff happens. Because I don't know, could you share what would be, I know claims happen all the time, but what would be like the claim rate, or is there like some kind of a measurement of for how many people we insure, what's the percentage that usually become claims, I guess, in the first year, 2 years, something like that?
Well, it's way more than 50%.
Hmm.
Everybody has different appetites, and that's why we see carriers come in and leave the market all the time, because they'll have a really attractive rate. And for a long time, there's a carrier called Amwins, and they had like just a hot rate for writing multifamily hab in North Texas when nobody else wanted it. So they just got inundated with all the brokers trying to get their products on the Amwins paper. And then Harvey happened,
Mm.
and then they lost billions of dollars in paid out claim, billions. And the underwriting paper that they wrote just left the market. They're like, we're done, deuces.
Mm.
I mean, so yes, they do invest the money, but not all of our investments go well.
Right.
Sometimes the stock market doesn't go well. Sometimes our bonds don't go well. Sometimes we get in apartment deals and they don't go well. I mean, that's just the reality of investing. It's always a risk. So they got to pay all their claims and they've got to pay all their employees. And then whatever money is left over that they don't owe to shareholders because they're publicly traded, some of that can get invested and some of that will make a return. But more often than not, natural disasters like that put insurance companies under. I mean, you got to remember, 2017 wasn't just Harvey. 2017 was Irma on the East Coast, Harvey in the South, like Gulf Coast, and then we had the 2017 wildfires, which are worse than the wildfires we're experiencing right now. That all happened in the third quarter of 2017. I mean, like, just 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 billions of dollars of paid out claims only in America. And again, these insurance companies write insurance all over the world. So that's only like our little microcosm of
Hmm.
what they lost money on that year. So yeah, they invested in stuff, but they ain't making enough money to clear that.
Yeah. Now, when they're reinvesting, or I guess my question is not really reinvesting, but when it comes to insuring things in the United States versus all over the world, I guess, um, what what's the difference? I mean, I would think that the same types of hazards exist everywhere, or maybe even in some places more hazards.
Mhm.
Yeah, how does that compare? Are we worse or better or in the US?
It's interesting. It's a larger kind of like macroeconomic conversation, but I love having it because I write insurance in other places, so I dig it, and I'm a total insurance nerd. The other countries don't let you finance the purchase of properties. Not every country has our banking system.
Mhm.
So not every country has a system where you can own a property and finance it.
Right.
So insurance follows banks. Insurance is there for banks not to lose the asset that they've loaned you money on, not for you.
Yeah.
It's for your bank. If your asset's paid free and clear and you still buy insurance, then it's for you.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's not for you. It's for the bank. So in countries where you don't get loans for properties, they don't really sell a lot of insurance. Okay. In other countries, they don't like to transfer their risk. They just pay for everything cash. We see in this country, billionaires. I mean, I know some that live here in Dallas, like, in the top 10, 13 list of billionaires in the state, own all the taco casas and like 50% of the Sonics. He doesn't buy insurance. He loves me. We drink scotch. He tells me all the time, don't angle for insurance. I go, baby, I don't. We just drank whiskey. He doesn't need to. He takes the loss. He takes the write-off. It's a better deal for him. So, it's hard to compare what we do in this country to other countries because in this country, we have a lot of people like me and you who are not billionaires yet, that are buying heavy assets and leveraging them. And that kind of leveraging doesn't exist the same in other countries.
Right.
And so insurance in other countries isn't always so much property based like it is here. It's more like general liability based, like in case we get sued for something. But not every country has the same kind of tort and law system
Mhm.
that we have in this country. Not all of our states have the same tort and law system as we do in this country. Mississippi is a great example, and so is Louisiana. They run things completely different from a lawsuit perspective than we do here in Texas. And so it's just so different.
Right.
It's just so different, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have that conversation another time.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. And then I also use insurance, different type of insurance to actually loan out to be my own bank, so that's another thing that,
Mhm.
I want to talk to you about, but we're kind of up on our time. So I know you, Kim, you are a wealth of knowledge and there's so much that you know that I don't. So maybe we'll have to have you back on another time. And I'm realizing
Okay.
that there's other categories too that you specialize in. So I'll send you an email and talk through a couple of those things if that's okay.
Of course, always.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being in our WMFRE book, our podcast, our new app coming out to educate women on cash flowing real estate assets, and obviously the protection side of those things as well. So we have attorneys in the app. We have everything that you kind of need to think of, because I feel like it's not risky to do these things, which women are so risk averse when it comes to investing, which is a good thing,
Yeah.
why we're so good at investing. But for example, if you have the right litigation attorneys, if you have the right insurance agents, if you have the right people to protect you, there's no reason to
Mhm.
be so afraid of things because you have the support you need. So it's just really important for me to talk through all those things and help women to feel more comfortable. Kim, if someone wanted to reach out to you specifically and ask you how to mitigate their losses investing in cash flowing assets, how would they reach you?
You can always call me. I'll give you my cell phone and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, but that thing rings off the hook. But you can call or text. My cell is 940-367-9740. You can email me, Kim, Kim, at heritagerissadvisors.com, or you can go to the website, heritagerissadvisors.com, and you find me on there.
Okay.
You can book face me. I'm on the book face. I can be found.
Perfect. Yes. So anyone that wants to reach out to Kim, feel free. And then I'll see everybody next chapter or next episode on Number One Leading Ladies podcast, where we build women up instead of tearing each other down. Thank you so much
Love
for
it.
your time.
Thank you. Bye.